Hey guys, Metal Jesus here. Now, you guys know I love my Nintendo Switch. I have literally hundreds of games for it, both physically and digitally. However, for the last couple years, I have felt that the Nintendo Switch is getting a little, how should I say, long in the tooth. It's a little underpowered, especially when it comes to AAA big game releases from third parties. And so that was definitely one of the reasons I got very excited when Valve announced that they were going to be releasing the Steam Deck, which was going to give me the opportunity to finally be able to play some of those PC games in a handheld format. Now, I know that you can do this on a laptop, but I was really looking for something like the Nintendo Switch, but having the flexibility to open up my world a little bit, to be able to play PC games both from Steam, also potentially from GOG.com, and Emulation, why not? And so in this video, I'm going to give you my review and impressions of the Steam Deck. And because it's me, and because I'm primarily a console gamer and a retro gamer, well, I'm going to break this up into three parts. So the first part's going to be me talking about playing modern Steam games on it, which I'm very excited to try, as well as running emulators on it. This is where I got some very interesting results, as well as running GOG games on it, because I have a pretty decent GOG library. So I'm very curious to see how well it will do with these. So with that in mind, let's get started. So I opted to get the top tier version of the Steam Deck. Now, if you're not familiar with it, it comes in three different varieties. The first one being $400. And then there's a middle tier one that costs $530, which basically has a faster internal SSD, and it comes with much more storage on it. But I opted to get the top tier one because I did want the extra storage, and I also wanted the anti-glare on the glass, primarily because I shoot YouTube videos in it, and so it's nice when it's not necessarily as reflective when I've got a camera pointed right at it. And I also know I'm going to go full in on this thing because as of right now, I don't have a dedicated gaming PC except for this. So now I'm going to start getting a lot of, Steam games, PC games, and really dive into that world a little bit. So in addition to that, I also went out and got a 1 terabyte micro SD card. So essentially I've got 1.5 terabytes of storage on this thing. And as you'll see, that has proven to be plenty as of right now. So let's go ahead and jump into the first group of games I wanted to test with this, and that is modern Steam games. And as I mentioned, up until now, I didn't really have that many Steam games because my most powerful PC, quote unquote, personal computer actually is an iMac I use for editing Final Cut Pro. And I didn't really have that big of a Steam library. So once I got this thing though, I jumped all in and bought a bunch of games for it. Also too, I was able to do the family sharing thing with a friend of mine and was able to get a lot of games on here actually and try them all out. And I have to say, one of the more impressive things about the Steam Deck is that it's only been a couple months since it was released, and already there are 3,000 verified or playable Steam games as of today. And that's only going to grow. 3,000. That is super impressive. And the way you can tell is when you look at a game in the Steam store, you'll see down there a little icon. And like, for instance, this one right here has a green check mark. That means that basically it has gone through all of the verification process for Steam and they have given it a go. That basically all you have to do is just download and play this game. It's going to be configured for the controls. It's going to be set up for the screen and the performance and all that stuff. You don't have to do anything. But then you have other icons that will give you some insight as to maybe how compatible this game is. If it's got a circle with a line through it, they're basically saying it probably won't work at all. But for the most part, you'll see these other icons here, which will give you sort of more information if you click on them. And 90% of the time, it seems like when you do that, it means that the game will run and play just fine, but sometimes you'll have to bring up the virtual keyboard to maybe hit enter or something like that, maybe type in your name, things like that. And I found that for the most part, those ones, again, not a hassle at all. They just work great. Being that this is a handheld, obviously you have to have some compromises to make some of these high-end PC games work. So for instance, let's go ahead and talk about, a fairly modern one, which is Forza Horizon 5. So this game has a green check mark, which is great, and it runs, and as you see here, it looks amazing on the screen, actually. I'm blown away by how good this looks. By the way, I need to mention that this video that I'm uploading to YouTube is technically at 30 frames a second. That's because my 4K camera, that's the most it can do. However, I just want to point this out that actually the game itself is running around 60 frames a second. The reason why I know that is because at any time you can bring up this little, it's like an on-screen display, and it'll show you how many frames per second that you're getting in the game, as well as like how much power it's using. And so I just want to point that out because I know some people are really sensitive to frame rates, and that's what's going on here. That in person, it actually looks really smooth, really good. How is it doing this? Well, the way it's doing this is basically lowering the resolution and some of the graphic options in the game in order to get that better frame rate and better performance. Now, the reason why I can get away with this is because, again, the Steam Deck screen is so small, right? It's a much lower resolution than, say, your big 4K television or even something that you would have, as a PC monitor. You can see that when you do video out. So this is me capturing the raw footage from the Steam Deck to my Elgato. And yeah, you can tell that the resolution is fairly low, right? It doesn't look that great in this video. But then when you look at it on the Steam Deck, it looks amazing. Like, I was really blown away. And you can play with those settings if you want. You can go into the game itself and, say, bump up the resolution or turn on some of the fancier graphic options at the expense of performance and or battery life. And it's completely open to you. If you have no problem getting, say, just a couple hours of battery life, but you want the best looking visuals that you can get, you can do that. You have that option here. And one thing that I found myself doing with this that I didn't expect to do was playing some of, say, the Xbox 360 era games, but on this handheld. It's something I hadn't really considered before, because these type of games typically aren't available on something like the Switch. Some of them occasionally might get ported over, but I gotta tell you, it was very cool to go on there and get some of these games for less than $10, sometimes way less than that, and play them on the Steam Deck. And again, they looked fantastic. And so that's one aspect that the Steam Deck is starting to open up for me a little bit, is the ability to go back and play some of these, these games that are maybe 5, maybe 10 years old, something like that, and get to play them on the go. And again, I know that I could do this on a laptop. I get it, but I want it in this form factor, you know what I mean? With the controllers and the screen right there. There's just something very cool about that. The next thing I want to check out is emulators, and I had heard very good things about how well this runs, especially CD-based emulators, something that maybe other devices would struggle with. But let's be honest, I mean, your mileage with running emulators may vary because there are just a ton of devices out there that will run these. Many of these you have in your pocket basically with a modern cell phone, right? But I like the idea of a device that's able to do everything, and I will say that yes, the Steam Deck does run them extremely well. I was blown away when I started digging into Dreamcast emulation, GameCube emulation, PSP, PlayStation 2. I mean, we all expected it to run the old 8-bit and 16-bit stuff, but the newer stuff, yeah, it's pretty impressive. And so I got really into playing some of these PlayStation 2 and GameCube and Dreamcast games on this. I hadn't seen them run quite like this. Now, I know some of you who are watching this, you're probably rolling your eyes. You're like, wow, man, like you are completely behind the times here. And I totally get it. I mean, I know that modern computers have been able to run these older systems very well, but I didn't realize just how much they bring to the visuals. Like, for instance, you can tell that the polygons are upscaled. Some of the textures are sharper. The frame rates are higher. I mean, it was just kind of like mind-blowing for me to play some of these games that I know extremely well on the original consoles on this handheld, and they looked beautiful. By the way, I want to mention, and some of you have probably noticed that in some of these games, on the sides of the screens, on the left and right of the screens, it's kind of doing some weird flickering thing. Well, that's because, it took me a while to figure this out, but that's because some of these emulators have like little hacks in there turned on by default to extend the visuals on the left and right if available. So for instance, a lot of these games were, originally made for 4:3 television screens, but they may have actual information on the left and right. And so some of these emulators will actually allow you to display that. And for the most part, actually, I found it a little distracting, but it's cool that that option's there. You can completely turn it off if you want to. Now, it's not perfect with all these emulators. I did run into a couple situations where it seemed like the audio in a game was kind of bogging it down a little bit. You see Splashdown, Rides Gone Wild here. I was a little disappointed that this game out of the box just didn't run right, and it's something to do with the audio. I haven't gone in and messed with this particular game that much to figure out what the issue is. I'm sure it's just a configuration thing. It can't have anything to do with the horsepower, but just be aware that you will run into a little bit of weirdness here and there. But again, I suspect that it can be ironed out. Now let's go ahead and talk about GOG games, because I am a huge fan of this website. As I mentioned before, I have a pretty large GOG game library, and the reason why I like it is because they have a lot of newer games as well as older games, and they have no DRM. So when you buy the game, you own it, you can back it up, they often give you some extra stuff, and I was really excited about this. And also a little skeptical, because I did tweet at GOG several months ago asking if they were going to support it, and they basically said, not officially, that if you really want to get your GOG games to work, they recommended you install Windows on your Steam Deck, which frankly made a lot of people upset, because what you're saying is get rid of the Steam OS that it comes with and put Windows on it, which isn't very well supported anyways. I mean, maybe in the future Windows will be, but it was definitely a very disappointing and frankly lame answer. And to be fair, GOG never did say they were going to support SteamOS. I just think that a lot of fans like me were like, why would you not support it? I mean, this is a great opportunity for you to sell potentially more games, have them playable. That just seems like a no-brainer, right? But that did not deter me. I was going to try it anyways, and thankfully the community has stepped up in a big way. There is a free app that you can get for Steam Deck called the Heroic Launcher. And essentially what that does is it allows you to launch your GOG library manager as well as the Epic Store. So that's a very cool option for people who maybe stepped outside a little bit of Steam's library and bought stuff elsewhere. And you can see here that it does read all of my library of games there. The ones at the top in color are the ones I've actually installed, and then the ones below that are in black and white I have yet to install. But for the most part, they do install. Getting them to run, though, has been a bit of a challenge for sure. SteamOS has a great Windows emulation layer called Proton, and basically that uses Wine to support Windows as best it can. And some of these GOG games do work. Sadly, almost all of the ones that try to do DOSBox do not. And I tried everything that I know how to do in my power. Now, I'm not a big Linux guy. I don't know SteamOS that well. I'm hoping that based on this video, some people will help me get some of these games to run on it. So the way it worked out is that most of the games that were designed for Windows did work on some level. Not all of them. Some of them acted kind of weird and didn't quite understand maybe what they're running on, but some of them did run. And when they did run, they ran absolutely great. But it's when I went to, like I said, play some of the older games that were technically running DOSBox. So they were originally MS-DOS games being emulated through DOSBox, probably inside of a Windows wrapper through the SteamOS It just didn't quite know what to do. Some of them would get a little bit further than others. Some of them would try to boot up and then just shut down. Some of them would give me like errors, like either they couldn't find a path, or in one case it couldn't figure out what color depth the whole display was in. Just a bunch of things like that. And to be honest, I'm not super surprised that this is happening. I'm just kind of disappointed because I know that this same game would run on my Mac or PC, but you know, through the Steam Deck, it's just asking it a little much. And the reason why I care about this beyond just getting my own library to run is because GOG continues to sell these games on their website. So it would be awesome if it would be supported. That's all I'm saying. Overall, I'm extremely pleased with the Steam Deck. I mean, it's an incredibly capable handheld that's very flexible in what it can run, as well as really well supported by Valve and the community. There have already been a number of Steam updates since the deck originally launched, adding a bunch of new features and bug fixes. Valve seems to be listening to the community and bringing a whole bunch of options that people ask for, so it definitely is something that is ongoing and evolving. And I do think it's powerful enough that there is some longevity with it. So I personally plan to use it for pretty much all of my new Steam games going forward whenever possible. And like I mentioned, it's an amazing emulation machine. So it's going to be the way that I'm going to play a lot of my PS2 games, my GameCube games, you know, my Dreamcast games on the go. And then maybe, hopefully, GOG or the community will figure out what's going on with some of the older titles that they sell and get those to work too. But I would love to know if you got a Steam Deck or if you have one on order, and what are some of the games that you recommend I get for mine. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching, thank you for subscribing, and take care.